Tensions between Cambodia and Thailand are once again pushing Southeast Asia toward uncertainty as a fragile border ceasefire struggles to hold. What began as territorial disagreements has now evolved into one of the region's most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints, forcing neighboring countries and ASEAN leaders to step in before the situation spirals further out of control. In recent weeks, diplomatic activity has intensified as regional governments attempt to calm the growing crisis. At the center of those efforts is Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who has taken an increasingly active role in trying to ease tensions between the two neighboring nations. The border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand is not new. For decades, both countries have argued over contested land areas and maritime boundaries, particularly in regions believed to contain valuable natural resources. While disagreements have existed for generations, the current phase of the conflict became far more deep. Angers after military clashes erupted along disputed territory. What initially appeared to be isolated confrontations quickly escalated into larger military operations. Troops from both sides exchanged artillery fire, border positions were reinforced, and civilians living near the conflict zones suddenly found themselves trapped in the middle of rising violence. The consequences were devastating. Entire communities were forced to flee their homes as the fighting intensified. Thousands of families abandoned villages near the border, fearing that further escalation could place them directly in harm's way. Reports from the region indicated that the conflict left heavy casualties and displaced hundreds of thousands of civilians. Even after ceasefire agreements were announced, tensions never truly disappeared. Military forces from both countries continue to maintain a heavy presence near contested zones, and mutual distrust remains deeply rooted. Officials from both governments have repeatedly accused one another of violating agreements and provoking instability along the frontier. The fragile calm has left Southeast Asia watching nervously, concerned that even a small incident could trigger another round of violence. Amid those fears, regional leaders moved quickly to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. ASEAN discussions brought senior officials together in an attempt to restore communication between Cambodia and Thailand. The meetings were viewed as a critical opportunity to reduce tensions and avoid a wider regional crisis. During those discussions, Thailand's Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul emphasized the human cost of conflict and warned against allowing tensions to escalate further. Thailand and Cambodia are two neighboring countries. It is best that we avoid conflict. It only brings losses and suffering, he said. The statement reflected growing concern across the region that another military confrontation would not only devastate border community ties, but also destabilize Southeast Asia at a time when the region is already dealing with multiple economic and security challenges. The conflict has become increasingly complicated because it is no longer limited to disputed land territory alone. Economic and maritime tensions have also started fueling the crisis. One of the biggest developments came after Thailand officially cancelled a long-standing agreement with Cambodia regarding joint offshore energy exploration. The agreement had existed for roughly 25 years and was originally intended to help both countries cooperate over maritime resources in disputed waters. The cancellation immediately sparked concern because the deal had long been viewed as one of the few remaining diplomatic bridges between the two governments. Thai officials defended the move by arguing that the agreement had failed to deliver meaningful progress after decades of negotiations. Cancelling the deal is not related to the border conflict with Cambodia, but part of my policy. It has been 25 years and there has been no progress, he said. Despite that explanation, many observers believe the decision carries major political and symbolic consequences. For Cambodia, the move was interpreted as another sign that relations between the two countries are continuing to deteriorate. Cambodian officials have signaled that they may pursue international legal options regarding maritime disputes, potentially opening another front in an already tense geopolitical confrontation. At the same time, nationalist sentiment has been growing on both sides of the border. Political pressure inside both countries has made compromise increasingly difficult. Leaders now face domestic expectations to appear strong and uncompromising, particularly after the violence seen during previous clashes That pressure has created a dangerous cycle. Every military deployment, diplomatic disagreement, or policy shift risks triggering another escalation in public anger, 80% political rhetoric. Meanwhile, ordinary civilians remain caught in the middle. Border communities continue to face uncertainty about whether peace will actually last. Many families displaced by earlier fighting have still not fully returned home, while schools, businesses, and local infrastructure in several areas remain heavily disrupted. For children living near the disputed zones, daily life has become dominated by instability and fear. Humanitarian concerns are now growing alongside security fears. The aid organizations have warned that prolonged displacement and continued military tension could create lasting economic and social damage for affected communities. Many families have already exhausted savings after months away from work and normal economic activity. The psychological toll has also become severe. Residents living near the frontier have described constant anxiety about renewed fighting, especially as troops remain stationed close to contested territory. Cambodia has responded to the deteriorating security environment by moving towards stronger military preparedness. The government recently advanced plans for a new military conscription law aimed at strengthening national defense capabilities following the border crisis. Under the proposal, young men between the ages of 18 and 25 could face mandatory military service. The decision reflects growing concern inside Cambodia that future clashes with Thailand may become unavoidable if tensions continue rising. For many analysts, the proposal signals that both sides are preparing for the possibility of a prolonged confrontation rather than a quick diplomatic solution. That is precisely why regional mediation efforts have become so important. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has emerged as one of the most visible regional figures attempting to keep diplomatic communication alive between both governments. The Philippines has increasingly positioned itself as a stabilizing voice inside ASEAN encouraging restraint and peaceful negotiations. The recent diplomatic meetings marked one of the few occasions in which Cambodian and Thai leaders publicly engaged following months of severe tension. Even the fact that both sides agreed to participate in discussions was viewed as an encouraging sign by regional observers. Still, diplomacy alone may not be enough to guarantee stability. The deeper issues driving the conflict remain unresolved. Territorial disagreements, maritime claims, military positioning, and historical grievances continue fueling suspicion between the two nations. Many of these disputes stretch back decades and are tied to powerful nationalist narratives inside both countries. That history makes compromise politically risky. Any concession could be portrayed domestically as weakness, placing additional pressure on leaders already dealing with growing public emotions surrounding the conflict. Security experts continue warning that the situation remains extremely fragile because military forces from both countries are positioned so closely near contested territory. Even a relatively small border incident could quickly escalate into another dangerous confrontation. That possibility has left ASEAN governments increasingly concerned about the broader implications for regional stability. Another major escalation would not only threaten Cambodia and Thailand, but could also damage trade, investment, and diplomatic cooperation across Southeast Asia. The crisis is unfolding during a period when the region is already facing significant economic and geopolitical uncertainty, energy security concerns, maritime tensions elsewhere in Asia, and ongoing political instability in neighboring countries have already placed enormous pressure on ASEAN leadership. As a result, the Cambodia-Thailand crisis has become more than just a bilateral border dispute. It is now viewed as a major test of ASEAN's ability to prevent conflict among its own member states. Regional leaders understand that failure to contain the situation could weaken confidence in ASEAN's role as a stabilizing force in Asia. That explains why diplomatic engagement has become so urgent. Behind closed doors, officials are reportedly working on confidence-building measures designed to reduce the chances of accidental military escalation. These efforts include maintaining communication channels between armed forces, increasing diplomatic coordination, and encouraging restraint in public rhetoric. Whether those efforts will succeed remains uncertain. The atmosphere along the border remains tense, and trust between both governments is still extremely limited. At the same time, domestic politics inside both countries continue complicating the search for compromise. Nationalist pressure, public anger, and political calculations are all shaping how leaders respond to the crisis. For civilians living near the frontier, however, the political calculations matter far less than the simple hope for peace and stability. Many displaced families are still waiting for the moment when they can safely rebuild their lives without fear of renewed violence. Some villages remain heavily damaged from earlier clashes, while others continue functioning under the constant shadow of military tension. The longer the uncertainty continues, the more difficult recovery becomes. Economic activity in affected areas has already suffered significantly, and prolonged instability risks creating deeper long-term hardship for local communities. Despite all these challenges, regional officials insist diplomacy remains the only realistic path forward. ASEAN leaders continue emphasizing dialogue, negotiation, and de-escalation as essential steps toward preventing another military confrontation. The goal now is not simply to maintain the current ceasefire, but to create conditions for a broader normalization of relations between Cambodia and Thailand. That process will likely require years of negotiation, trust, building, and political patience. Resolving border disputes that have existed for decades is never simple, especially when national identity and sovereignty are involved. Still, regional leaders understand the stakes are simply too high to allow the conflict to spiral further. Another round of fighting could devastate communities, damage regional economies, and increase instability across Southeast Asia. For now, the region remains cautiously hopeful that diplomacy can hold the fragile peace together. But beneath the surface, tensions remain dangerously close to boiling over once again. As negotiations continue, and military forces stay positioned near disputed territory, the world is watching closely to see whether Southeast Asia can avoid another major conflict. The coming months may determine whether diplomacy succeeds in preventing escalation or whether the Cambodia-Thailand border crisis enters an even more dangerous chapter.